Hello and welcome back to my channel and a dinner that I made inspired by Texas Roadhouse Restaurant. So we're making a Texas Roadhouse Copycat recipe for their rolls and then also a roadkill steak recipe that I think you'll enjoy. But first, for the rolls, I put 1 1/4 cups of milk into a deep mixing bowl and put that into the microwave to heat up. It needs to be between 105 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. I have my salt and my yeast out and my butter. We're going with 1/4 cup of unsalted butter at room temperature. I'm using plant butter, but you can use regular butter. I'm trying to get the milk to the right temperature. It was too hot, and then I started another project, and when I came back, then it was too cold. And so I put it back in the microwave at 10 seconds or 20-second intervals. If the milk is too cold, it will not activate the yeast. And if it's too warm or too hot, it will kill the yeast. So it's really important that you get it the right temperature. I added in 1/3 cup of white sugar and then stirred it well with the milk. I'm using an instant read thermometer to determine when the milk is the right temperature. Once I got the milk to the proper temperature, I added 1 packet of yeast, which is 2 1/4 teaspoons. And I added that to the milk and sugar mixture. And then let it sit for about 5 minutes. Once the yeast got a little bit foamy, then I added the milk mixture to my mixing bowl, and I am adding 1 teaspoon of salt. I added 1/4 cup, which is 1/2 stick, of unsalted butter at room temperature. Next goes in 1 large egg, which is also at room temperature. I'm not adding an egg because we have egg allergies in our household. So instead, I am adding 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder and a little bit more butter than was called for, and a couple of tablespoons of water to make an egg substitute. Next, I am adding in 3 1/2 cups of bread flour, or you can use all-purpose flour. If you need a little bit more, you can add it in by tablespoons. You want the dough to be tacky but not sticky. And I think mine was a little wetter or a little more sticky than maybe it should have been, but it worked out just fine. It wasn't too sticky to work with. After I mix the dough and get the desired consistency that I want, then I set a timer for 10 minutes and set my mixer on the second speed and let it knead for 10 minutes. So while the dough is kneading, then I am quickly making up some cinnamon honey butter to go with our rolls. I normally make this with my hand mixer, whipping it on high speed to incorporate a lot of air into it and make it fluffy. But I'm in a hurry this day, and so I am just mixing the ingredients. I'm not even measuring exact amounts. I am just mixing half a cup of butter, a couple of tablespoons of powdered sugar, a couple of tablespoons of honey, and a couple of shakes of cinnamon, and then just mixing it by hand and putting it in a container into the refrigerator to chill. I have a video with the recipe and exact amounts, and I will link that in the description box. I'm adding just a little bit of vegetable oil into a plastic bowl here and rubbing it around and then coating my hands with the oil. And I take out the ball of dough out of the mixer. You can see it's a little sticky, and I'm putting that into the plastic bowl. This bowl has a plastic lid, and I have an obligation, and so I was going to put this in the refrigerator. But before I left, I took it out of the refrigerator and covered it with a kitchen towel. And when I got back home, it had risen, it had doubled in size, and so it was just the perfect amount of time. I was gone for a couple of hours. So I lightly floured my counter and put some flour on my rolling pin and dumped the dough out. After I punched it down, I dumped it out onto the counter and began to roll it out. I just need a rectangle, and I need to roll it out to 8 inches by 12 inches approximately, making it a half an inch thick. So after I get the desired size and thickness, I'm going to cut this into 24 pieces. So I make 3 cuts across the width and 5 cuts down the length, which will give me 24 rolls. I prepared a baking sheet with non-stick cooking spray sprayed onto it and put the pieces of the rolls onto the baking sheet. I only put 15 pieces on as I wanted to freeze some and see how that worked. And so the other 9 pieces I put on a different baking sheet. I covered it with plastic wrap and let it proof for about an hour. So these 9 rolls I put on this pizza pan with some parchment paper and put them in the freezer to flash freeze. And then I was going to put them in a bag for another time, but they were so good that I ended up using them the next day. The ones that I proofed are now going into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 to 15 minutes. I think that I baked them more like 14. This is what they looked like when they were done, and I melted a couple of tablespoons of butter. The recipe says to brush it on. I don't like cleaning up brushes that have butter on them, so I am just using a teaspoon and just going slow and rubbing it on, and it works out fine that way if you don't have a brush or if you don't like to wash brushes either. These were so good, and we cracked into them before dinner was made. And here I am putting some of the honey butter that I made earlier onto a roll. Now onto the making of the roadkill steaks. I got this recipe from the YouTube channel Mandy in the Making, and I will link her video in the description box. I made this once before and went exactly to her measurements, and it turned out really good. I didn't really like the way it turned out this time, but I kind of went rogue and didn't measure and exchanged things. And so I think if you follow the recipe to a T, I think you'll be okay, and I think you'll be really pleased with the end result. The recipe calls for 1 pound of ground beef, which will make 3 1/3 pound patties. I had about double that amount, and also I had defrosted it in the microwave, and I think that changed the texture so that it wouldn't hold together as well. So either make sure you've had your meat defrosted for a while or buy fresh meat to make this recipe. The recipe also calls for 3 tablespoons of A1 sauce, 3 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, 1 teaspoon of seasoned salt, a half a teaspoon of black pepper, 1 egg, and then for the topping, it calls for a package of sliced mushrooms, 1 onion that has been sliced, and sliced Monterey Jack cheese. I used a grated Colby Jack or Fiesta Mexican blend. So I didn't have enough A1 sauce, or didn't think I did, so I ended up using barbecue sauce and used way too much and had difficulty keeping the patties together. I also didn't use an egg, which would have helped because of before mentioned egg allergies. But when I could see that they weren't holding together when I was flipping them in the pan, I took 3 of the patties that I hadn't cooked and I put them back in the bowl and added some breadcrumbs. And that helped a little bit. And my family's not picky. They don't care that the steaks didn't hold together, but just don't use as much barbecue sauce as I did, and you'll be fine. The sugar in the barbecue sauce also caused the black that you're seeing from caramelization on the patties, which some people might not like. We're fine with it, but I don't remember having that issue when I made them before and used just the A1 sauce. I also liked the flavor that the A1 sauce gave to it better than I did the barbecue sauce. So it's entirely up to you and your preference. After these browned on both sides, I put them in the oven on a baking sheet at 350 degrees for 10 minutes. I'm slicing an onion here, and then I'm going to add that to a frying pan with a little bit of oil in it, and then also add a package of sliced mushrooms. Adding salt and pepper to taste, and then frying on high until they are soft and have a little bit of color on them. I pulled the steaks out of the oven, and so now I am just adding the mushroom and onions mixture on top of those, and then adding some cheese on top of that. I'm using a Fiesta blend grated cheese, but you could use Monterey Jack, sliced cheese, or a pepper jack if you want it spicy, or you could use cheddar cheese if you wanted to. Now these go back in the oven on a low broil to melt the cheese. I'm plating up the plate right now, and this night we had scalloped potatoes as a side dish and also some green beans, and I'm putting that roll on the plate as well, and then adding the roadkill steak or the hamburger steak if you don't like that name. Be looking for my video on how to make the scalloped potatoes to come out in the near future. And there you have our Texas Roadhouse inspired meal with Texas Roadhouse Roadkill steaks, with the link to that in the description box. Roadhouse rolls with honey cinnamon butter, and it was a delicious meal. It looks like I was being a little stingy with the cheese. You can certainly add more cheese to the top of this hamburger steak or ground beef steak. The next day, I took the frozen rolls out of the freezer. You could add them to a bag at this point and put them back into the freezer, but we enjoyed them so much the night before that I wanted to make them up on this day. And so I'm just using the exact same parchment paper and pan that I had frozen them in, and I'm adding some nonstick spray to it, dividing them out evenly, and putting some plastic wrap over them to thaw and then proof. And it took 2 hours from freezer to completely baked. After they rose, I put them in a 350 degree Fahrenheit oven and baked them for 13 or 14 minutes until golden brown on top. And then I just spread the butter this time with a knife. I didn't even melt it first, and it worked out fine that way, to put the butter on top. All of the recipes shown in this video will be included in the description box. Thank you so much for joining me, and please consider subscribing to my channel. It's free, you just have to hit that button. Have a great day and goodbye.